Justin Kuritzkes, you wrote the film Challengers, which is a love triangle set in the world of tennis. Now, you've said you were inspired by watching a Serena Williams Naomi Osaka match. Were you a big fan of tennis before then?
No, I hadn't been a big tennis fan or even really a big sports fan before this one moment in 2018 when I happened to turn on the US Open because it was happening that day. And it was the final between Serena Williams and Naomi Osaka. And there was this very controversial call by the umpire where he accused Serena Williams of receiving coaching from the sidelines. And because I hadn't been a tennis fan or, a big tennis fan up until that point, I had never heard of this rule, but immediately it struck me as this very intensely cinematic situation that you're all alone on the court and there's one other person in this massive stadium who cares as much about what happens to you out there as you do, but that's the person you can't talk to. And so immediately I started to think, well, what if you really had to talk about something? And what if it was something beyond tennis? What if it was about the two of you? And then what if it somehow involved the person on the other side of the net? How would you have that conversation? And how could you communicate the tension of all of that using the tools of film? And so that was really the first spark of the idea for Challengers and also the first spark of me becoming now like a legitimate obsessive tennis fan.
And yeah, how much over the course of writing the screenplay did you end up learning about tennis? Like, well, yeah, how much research did you have to do?
Well, I took a long time between when I first got the idea and when I actually started writing. It was a couple of years where I was doing other stuff. I was in the middle of writing a book and releasing another book. And so I was doing at first what I thought was research and then quickly kind of just became reading for my own enjoyment, where I was reading everything I could get my hands on about tennis and watching every match I could find to the point where I found myself running out of Grand Slams and, Masters events and all of that and finding my way onto the Challenger Tour, which is what a lot of professional tennis is. These tournaments where you're not playing for that many ranking points and where it often costs more to travel to the tournament than it does to win the tournament. Um, and that felt all of a sudden like a really interesting place to set a sports movie because I hadn't seen that, at least not in the world of tennis. Um, so yeah, I was doing a lot of research that didn't feel like research, but then became a lot of the backbone of the central conflict of the characters.
And with those three characters, as an audience member, I found my sympathy shifting between them over the course of the film. Was that ever the case for you while you were writing it?
Yeah, always. I mean, you never want something that's fun about a triangle is that it's a very stable shape in some sense, but it's also a shape with a lot of tension. And anytime the distance between 2 points in the triangle move, the distance between the other point moves as well. And all the angles have to reform themselves. So for me, I always wanted to uh, make each point as strong as it could be and not ever let one point dictate the shape.
And there's kind of an ambiguity to the film, as the loyalties and relationships shift, who has the upper hand. Even the ending has an ambiguity to it. Do people come away from the film with very different ideas about it?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, you know, I always my only real goal for the script was that it felt as engaging and as exciting as a really great tennis match, you know, because my sort of impulse to write the movie in the first place was that I was watching all of this tennis and I started to feel like tennis was more exciting to me than everything I was watching on TV or going and seeing in the movies. And so I asked myself, what could I write that would be as good as tennis? And what would make tennis even better? And for me, the answer to that question was tennis would be even better if I could know at every moment exactly what was at stake for the people playing and for the people watching. Um, so that was really the impulse that made me want to write the movie. And what people take away from it, I can't possibly control that.
Now, a lot of the storytelling in the film is done through the actual tennis matches. How do you go about writing tennis gameplay that tells, its own kind of story?
It's a bit of a balance, in a screenplay, you're always trying to give people enough information and enough description so that they can see the movie on the page and feel like they've watched the movie when they're done reading the screenplay. And in a movie like this, where so much of the action is taking place through gesture and through tennis, and so much of the drama is happening wordlessly, it's really important that you give both the reader and then eventually the people who are going to make the film with you all the tools they need to understand what's happening dramatically. But you also have to leave space for not just somebody like Luca with his vision and, or a DP, Sayambu, or the actors, but also you have to leave space for like the tennis consultants to give their thoughts on how you can make the tennis more dynamic and more authentic without bogging the reading experience down with too much information. So it's a bit of a balance, but I did feel like I needed to be very specific about the points that mattered.
And Luca Guadagnino is the director of the film. What was it like working with him, and what do you think he brought to this material?
Well, he brought all of himself to it, which is what he does for every movie. But it's funny, like our first conversation we ever had about the movie, we talked on the phone right after he read it, and he said to me, I know next to nothing about tennis, but I know a great deal about desire. And I couldn't argue with him about that. He does know a great deal about desire. It runs all throughout his cinema. But what I knew about, watching his work, like even if you watch the way he treats dance in Suspiria, I knew that he would find a way to make the tennis feel exciting and dynamic and like purely cinematic in a way that would elevate it beyond the sport itself, because I think the the trap of a sports movie a lot of the time, or something that can often go wrong in a sports movie, is that it's often the case that it would be more engaging to just watch the actual sport because sports themselves are really dramatic. That's why people invest so much of their lives in sports and why they, it's why people go crazy when their team wins. So I knew Luca would be able to find a way to make the experience of watching the tennis in this movie give the audience something that they couldn't get in the real sport. But I mean, that's just a tiny fraction of the things that Luca brings to this project. But on the tennis front, that's certainly one of them.
Now the film is nonlinear, it moves back and forth in the timeline. How did you decide to structure it that way?
Well, that sort of came with the impulse to write the movie in the first place, because it was coming from this place of asking myself, how could I make tennis better? How could I make the experience of watching tennis more exciting for me? And it was that thing of wanting to know exactly what was at stake. So from the very beginning, I always knew that I was going to drop the audience into a tennis match and then gradually fill them in on why this seemingly low level, low stakes match actually meant so much to everybody involved. So I knew that that was going to be the structure, and I kind of knew the time frame of when we would jump back and forth. I knew that we would meet the characters when they were 18 and follow them through their mid-30s, because that's the lifespan of an athlete. If you think of an athletic career as like a mini life, it kind of begins when you're born, when you're 18, and you die when you're useless, which is usually around 35 or 40 if you're really lucky. So I knew all of that, but I didn't know exactly when I was going to jump where.
And when cast the film, when the actors are, of course, then their chemistry is crucially important to a story like this. When the film was cast, did you look at the characters you had written any differently than how you had envisioned them originally when you wrote the script?
Yes and no. I mean, you cast people in the first place because they're right for the character that's already there, you know, because you don't have that much time making a movie to get somebody where they need to be. So we were really fortunate in this case to cast people who already not only understood their characters, but saw a way in for themselves right away. I mean, certainly Zendaya was one of the first people to come on board the movie. And she's also a producer on the movie, and was like completely instrumental in making the movie what it is and putting it together the way that it's been put together. And she had very sharp and specific ideas about her character, um, that we got to explore in this extended rehearsal process that we had. We were together in Boston for like 3 weeks before we started shooting with me and Luca and the producers and the actors. And we just sat around a table and read through the scenes and sometimes got them up on their feet and acted things out. And Zendaya would constantly have little insights into Tashi that some of which feel small at the time, but end up um, really revealing something profound about the character. So an example of that that comes to mind is that in my original script, Art and Tashi were supposed to be traveling around the tour circuit with a nanny for their kid. And Zendaya had the thought one day in rehearsal, well, I don't know that Tashi would have a nanny. I think she might want her family there. You know, she might want to travel with her mom. And then all of a sudden that opened up something in me where I went, of course, that's so right. And then I made her mom a character in the present, you know. So little stuff like that builds up over time, and it really amounts to a ownership of a character, which is really exciting to watch.
Well, congratulations on the film, and on your other film as well, Queer. You have two films out this year. So thank you so much for talking to me about it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very, very much.
Azazel Jacobs, you wrote and directed his three daughters, about the title characters, sisters who come together and often clash with each other as their father is at the end of his life. What inspired you to tell this story?
Um, I think, well, I grew up in Lower Manhattan. I went away to Los Angeles for many, many years. I came back, my wife and I moved back here for a bunch of reasons, but one of them was to become a caretaker to my parents who suddenly hit an age, and there's suddenly health conditions that suddenly were just like right there that felt very far away from most of my life and then was very up close. So coming back to New York City, the place that I was raised, um, and trying to, I'd have this window between 6 and 9 a.m. before the kind of storm of just figuring out how to become a caretaker and just like what that meant, especially not having kids. So, okay, do this and do that, and I need to get this form and that form. I had a window like basically from sun up to 9 that I could just walk through New York City, and I was extremely inspired by the life that I was seeing, not only with the stresses that I was living. And I think that had got me writing like that. I really wanted to do something that was expressing what I was going through and just the kind of frustration and fears that I had, but also the hopes and the joy that I was seeing, just being back home.
And these three characters you create are so detailed and specific. How did you discover these characters and their personalities and how they butt up against each other and flesh them out?
It was a way of me making peace with like the different approaches that I was having. Like I found myself kind of shape shifting into very different people when I first came back and being like, oh, I need to get this form, or I just want to run away, or I want to just kind of be a peacekeeper the best way that I could. And realizing that I could separate those different feelings into not only characters, but into siblings and keep them under the same house gave me some separation within myself and put them in conflict with each other in the way that I was kind of feeling deep inside, but now suddenly it became external. And so that was the beginning of that.
Was there any of the characters that were more challenging to write than the others, would you say?
No, I mean the truth is that this was completely the opposite of the experience of kind of becoming a caretaker. This is like a lot of fun to write. And the moment that I understood that these different kind of approaches were actually these different sisters, I just started writing, and I was very into the idea of having, especially that Katie, the first sister, opens up with this page and a half monologue, and that was so freeing for me. That was the first thing that I wrote, and it just like it opened up things in a way that I wouldn't express things in this way. I usually don't write characters that express that are kind of talk so much and say everything that they're thinking. But it kind of drew not only did it like set off a train, but it drew a battle line from the beginning that I could see could carry me all the way through the story.
Early on, the sisters seem to have these very clear, delineated roles in the family. Who they are to each other, like the responsible one, the caretaker, the peacekeeper, all those things. But that sort of we see how much more complicated they are as the story progresses. How did you plot out those character arcs and where they would go and where they would end up?
I think plotting would be the wrong word. It was more just digging and digging. And like, I like this idea of starting with such surface level, like we are these people even real? Like she's, it's written very much the way that I cut it. So, having, let's say, Katie against the white wall, like wanting to feel like it was an audition. So they're kind of like starts off as very surface characters. And then as I dug deeper into like what could make that person perform this way, suddenly you start seeing seams in them and you realize like, oh, well, I think that especially my aims in the beginning was that they're portraying roles that they expect of themselves or they think their sisters expect of each of themselves. And which is something that I like find at least true to my own life, which is like no matter what I've gone through, and when I go back with a certain, family or certain friends, I just go back into the role that I think that they expect of me. And then after time, hopefully something else goes. So it was starting off with the kind of these opposing tracks as they start clashing with each other, digging deeper and deeper, and then suddenly realizing, okay, that could come from that. And then, when I get to the place where, let's say, Christina and Katie have their own kind of childhood language, we start understanding like, oh, they actually had a very quite different childhood to a certain point than Rachel. So this is one of those scripts that I wrote forward rather than plotting out so much and just like listened to them and listened to a certain type of rhythm that I was chasing, not only in terms of the way that they spoke, but the rhythm that I feel happens when you're facing something as serious as somebody passing and it's absolutely going to happen because it seems to have an odd effect on time, at least in my experience.
And most of the film takes place in this one apartment. What's it like writing a story that's very much this one setting for the most part, a story, and how difficult was it to kind of find that right space, to actually film it?
Well, it's not difficult because it's fun because because it's so contained, it's pretty easy to go like, okay, this is happening in the kitchen, this is going in the bedroom, everything's so close, so it's just like a jump over there, and realizing like, oh, we definitely will need some air. I needed some air, so we'd go down to the bench with Rachel. Like anytime that I felt like I felt suffocated while I was writing, then I would step out with Rachel and try to get this air with her while she kind of smokes on the bench. Um, I had like not only did I write with these actors in mind, but I was writing with a certain type of apartment that I grew up visiting, growing up here quite a lot, where you could feel the family in the walls. You could feel there's a history, you could feel the generations. And there was something that the rooms, the bed on the floor, the father's chair, the worn chairs, the what the tables were. There was some specific thing that I was chasing down, but so it made me reach out to a lot of kids that I grew up with that grew up in rent stabilized place, and that led me down to this path of this building, in the Lower East Side, and uh, and I was able to amazingly have access to a lot of people opened up their doors as possibilities for us to shoot, but walking into that particular apartment, like even though it was a young couple there and it was very modernized, it felt like the bones were just evident. Like there was something there, like, oh, I could feel history, and I knew that I could take advantage of having a place like that, which was like if I teased out the way that we see the place, it would take a while for us to understand how the sisters are connected or not connected.
Now, for the most part in the film, we don't see the father on screen. How did you decide exactly how their father would or wouldn't be a part of the story? You know, with him looming over it, kind of like already kind of like the spectral presence.
Yeah, I think decision, it wasn't a decision. It was one of these things when I was writing, and suddenly I had pretty much set up a rule that we wouldn't be going into this bedroom. I was surprised when I was writing and then they were bringing the father out. It kind of scared me in a way, which was like, oh, I had such a kind of small, neat film, and now suddenly things are getting complicated in a way that, yeah, that worried me. But I also chase after that feeling when things worry me, and also I like that in films sometimes when they cross into a direction that I really wasn't expecting, when it starts kind of it has these coloring lines and then it colors outside of those lines. Ultimately, once I started hearing what the father had to say, which is the mixture of a lot of things that either I've thought about or I've heard or my own have come from my own parents, um, it became very important to me. Like I needed to hear those words. And all I had to do then was just kind of just stick with it with the understanding that it may not be for everybody, but because my desire for those words was so deep, I felt like some other people will feel the same way, and I just followed that through. Of course, like I wasn't writing for J.O. Sanders, but it became a whole other thing once I sat down with him and realized like, oh, he brings this it it explains something that the film was talking about, which is like the only way to feel certain death is through absence. And so having somebody, such a powerful and amazing actor like Jay, say those words, I feel like ultimately I could stand back and say, I don't know if I could have made that point that I about the fantasy of portraying death, but also what absence means when someone's gone without getting a bit of the father.
I want to thank you for talking to me about your film. Congratulations on it, and it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Same. Thank you so much.
Joslyn Barnes, you co-wrote the Nickel Boys screenplay with Ramel Ross, based on the novel by Colson Whitehead. What were your impressions of the novel when you first read it?
Well, the novel is so well written and it's so perfect in its economy, I would say. There's really no fat in that novel. And it's also very cause and effect in a way. And so we felt when we first read it that it would be a very challenging adaptation to do and that it would really require adjusting it really to cinema and really opening it up in a different way to tell the story in a different way. Um, it's so much more about also directing sort of where you look in our approach to the film.
And yeah, the story was inspired by the Dozier School for Boys in Florida, this very abusive institution. How much did you know about it before reading the novel, and how much did you learn about it through the novel and through writing the screenplay?
I didn't know about the Dozier School specifically before reading the novel. I know a lot about the reservation schools and other schools like this. There were these, so-called reform schools that keep being discovered and the horrors of those that keep being discovered in different places around the world, here, Canada, Australia, Ireland, other places. So it's a story that's not unfamiliar, I would say, to different contexts, often racialized, often about class, often about specific belief systems that oppress other cultures and other peoples. I think in this case, we learn so much, reading the book, but also reading the oral histories a lot of the journalism, a lot of the coverage that we discovered in looking through the archives, images from the actual school, and also, the research that we did talking with people, even the people that exhumed the graves, for example, who discovered the bodies, where the bodies were buried, this kind of thing. So it was very, a very layered process of research. And it just really, the care that went into discovering these, and unearthing this story, by everybody involved in it, including the courage of the men who came forward to give witness to what they had been through, was really something that meant a lot to us to honor.
And one of the things that makes the film so unique is that it's told through the first person point of view of its two main characters.
Mhm.
How do you go about writing a screenplay, with that in mind, in such a different way of telling a story?
Yeah, well, I produced Ramel's first, film, Hale County, this evening, and I think that I came to understand through doing that the kind of patience that he'd acquired in making images, especially the large and medium format photographs. And it was, it kind of struck me that his use of the camera was kind of an extension of consciousness. So when we read Colson's novel, and he proposed to do this in first person, it didn't really surprise me, that he would propose a kind of sentient perspective. And on the script page, we called that POV, even though it went further and deeper than that. But the kind of questions of, how you get past the conditioning that we all have of being voyeurs, how to entice the viewer into entering the eyes of the main characters, what it means when you not only are looking through, entering a point of view, but also the way the gaze is returned to you then becomes different. Actors are taught, not to look at the camera. In this case, they're looking at you and they're looking at each other as well. So that, I understood that kind of grammar that he was looking for. And it's a kind of something that we resisted, this transitional narrative, as a structural strategy to very deliberately suspend what he calls conclusive imagining. And so in writing that, we felt that we started it as an edit, firstly, because the specificity of the images, which are organized in a kind of in narrative images and scenes that really flesh out, develop the characters and flesh out the story, and then archival images which extend the imaginative world and which also convey the actual investigation that one of the main characters is undertaking as revelations are made about what's being discovered at the Nichols School, and then adjacent images, which kind of serve to deepen the interiority of the characters. And then, finding a way to write that, and also to take the other idea Ramel had, which was to shoot the film in oneers without coverage, without benefit of coverage, meant that we were also writing the script, with duration in mind, in terms of the way scenes would work and sequences would work. It's kind of it's a way to, I think, reorganize time. Time moves both forward and backward in the script simultaneously, and so therefore the present moment is really the moment that is less determined. And we felt that we would respect the viewer so much if we could give them that experience of participating in the unfolding very directly, like putting it together as you go, the way that you kind of experience reality and how reality is put together.
Now, much of the violence that's inherent to this institution, happens off screen. Was that a conscious decision?
Yeah, I mean, it was really one of the first things that we said when we were offered the book to adapt and to as a director producer team, and then ultimately when Ramel asked me to co-write with him. One of the first things that we talked about was the desire to to not show on-screen violence because we felt that we could, I think, respect the experience of violence that the real people who had lived this violence. Um, we could respect that by acknowledging it through engaging every viewer's own imaginative capacity. What you imagine is going to be worse than what you've seen, but there's also a reason to not reinscribe the imaging that we've seen over and over again, especially the kind of violence that Black bodies have received over decades and decades of work. So we've been so conditioned to seeing Black people this way that we decided that it was really important to find a very different way to represent what had happened.
As you mentioned, you worked with Ramel Ross on Hale County this evening. How's it different collaborating with him on a documentary versus a scripted film?
Well, I think it's funny, coming because we've done a lot of documentaries, and I think coming out of documentary um, gives you a certain approach to writing that comes a lot from editing. And I think in his case, because he comes out of photography as well, that it was important to take the first approach, of writing to think about it as an edit. Also because, so much of the labor of the storytelling comes from the way that we envisioned the image sequences. And those are written out in the script, just to say, even the archival footage that we then asked our archival producers to go and find. It was really important to us to include very specific ideas about what images we were looking for. There was also the process of discovery during the making of the film, what the actors brought to it, what the locations, the designer, the cinematographer, everyone really, I think, worked together so beautifully across the whole film and then beyond into the edit and into the post and the sound design and so forth to really support the original vision. But it's very much as scripted, including the final montage sequence, which is quite detailed. This was very much about the writing and conceiving it from start to finish, from image to image, basically.
Well, I want to congratulate you on the film, and
Thank you.
thank you so much for talking with me about it.
Thank you.
I'm Daniel Montgomery here for our Meet the Experts Film Writers panel. I'm joined by Justin Kuritzkes from Challengers, Azazel Jacobs from His Three Daughters, and Joslyn Barnes from Nickel Boys. Now your three films are quite different from each other. One of the things I love about these panels is getting to talk about such a wide range of projects. But what attracts you in general to a subject that makes you want to tell that story? Is there some sort of connecting, factor, or does it change every time? Start with Justin.
Uh, yeah, I think on a superficial level, it changes every time. Different worlds or different genres maybe attract you. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I try not to think about genre or tone or anything like that as much as I just think about character. I become obsessed with a character and their point of view or multiple characters and the energy bouncing around between them. And that's sort of what sticks with me and makes me actually want to sit down and write something.
Azazel?
I'm somebody that's always trying to go someplace that I feel like I haven't been. I'm always trying to think that I'm going in an opposite direction than the previous film. I have had the experience of a montage of my work being put together and realizing that it hasn't been the case at all. But that's definitely been my drive to try to go someplace that worries me and someplace new.
And Jocelyn?
It's so interesting to hear you guys talk and also to hear you speak about the films. I was really fascinated listening to your processes, so really thank you for that. I kind of agree that with Justin that it's on the surface, stories are different, characters are different. Maybe you're experiencing something in your own life that makes you want to do something in a particular moment. But I do feel like I do feel like there's certain bones that we worry, like just, like a dog with a bone over time that just keep coming back as themes. And one of them for me is just this desire in film, and it doesn't really matter what kind of film, but this desire to think about our ethical relationships to one another and to other beings on the planet, and how to think about those, and what is the process that we agree all together as a kind of how do we invite each other into an experience, and how do we come to understand a shared reality? And I think in this case with Nickel, this had a lot to do with memory, and recognizing rather than knowing was a central thing for me in thinking this through with Ramel. And it occurred to me as we were doing it that this had actually been a theme in other films that I'd been involved with, and that it was something that was super important to me.
And what would you say is the most satisfying aspect of just the writing process? As you're going about it, Jocelyn.
I mean, the most satisfying thing for me was to see the script disappear entirely into the film. I just felt like that was the most beautiful thing, to see the actors transform, make it live, to see, all of the expertise that was brought to the film by everyone who participated in it, and to know that there was a strong architecture inside it that would give everyone the freedom to do that. Um, that for me was the most beautiful thing, to just watch it disappear.
Justin.
Well, I mean, I definitely agree that the collaboration is part of what sets writing screenplays apart from writing other kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Right before I started writing screenplays, I was writing novels. And what's exciting about that is that when you're done, that's it. That's the complete work of art, is that you hand over this manuscript, and maybe they put a cover on it, and that is part of the experience. But for the most part, the book is the thing. And a screenplay is always two things. It's always this thing that's meant to be a meaningful and exciting reading experience on the one hand, and help the reader see the movie and feel like they've watched the movie. But then on the other hand, it's this very practical document that's like architectural plans to help hundreds of people across dozens of departments build a skyscraper, you know. And that's true whether it's a big scale movie or a small scale movie. Every movie is this massive undertaking by lots of people. So I think being on set and seeing the trucks unloading the equipment, that's a kind of that's like drugs, you know. That's a really intoxicating thing, because you can feel this thing that you did alone all of a sudden turn into a community. And there's something really energizing about being around all these people doing their jobs.
Azazel?
Yeah, that's cool. I've never written a book. Like I've never written with the end, like that's gonna be the finished, I'm finished writing the script and or finished writing and that's gonna be it. So that's kind of a dream. It's always like in the back of my mind. Production's always in the back of my mind while I'm writing. I'm always, no matter how sure I feel like, oh, this is gonna be the story I'm gonna tell, I feel that way with each script, and then maybe 1 out of 5 turns out to be the one. So there's some part of me that's not that I'm letting go of it, but it allows me to never, I know that it's not the finished phase, and I know that it may just not it may not come into fruition. But I do think what's been very gratifying is that sometimes now when I'm writing, first off, like I feel like I finally understand structure that's taken so long for me. Like there's something that there's a rhythm, there's something that now clicks that makes sense to me when I'm writing, that took me many years to get to. And then also either stories or experiences in my life or scripts that haven't happened. Sometimes I'm writing, and then that moment that I never got to express suddenly winds up in the script, and that is such a gratifying feeling. Like, oh, that thing that I thought was gone forever and was never going to happen suddenly can fit in right here, and I can express it in this way. And um, I love that when that happens.
And what writers from any medium really have inspired you lately in your work, or have just impressed you and excited you, Azazel?
Oh, wow, that's a good one. I will say that for whatever reason, this particular last script, like I was reading a lot about film criticism, and one of the best ones, Lillian Ross's picture is kind of amazing, and then Louise Brooks' book, like collected a story, just writing about film, had me think about structure and had me think about just the idea of how to tell a story. And those I hold on to. I hold on to a lot, and I held on to like quite a lot even now while I'm writing more. I think about um, just it's so personal, it's so thoughtful, it's so giving, and it's something that I'm trying to bring into my own work.
Jocelyn?
I think I've been reading a combination of things of fiction and nonfiction and preparing for another film that's coming up, which is a book by Abdelrahman Munif called Cities of Salt, which is about the first encounter of the Saudi Bedouin with the American oil companies. So I've been really focused on that. I would say inspiring another writer who's inspired me a lot in the last few years is Rachel Cusk. Not necessarily for thinking about cinema or adaptation, just but for the pleasure of reading.
Justin?
I'll definitely second Rachel Cusk.
Mm.
Yeah, I love her books very much. I mean, when I was writing Challengers, I was reading a lot of manga, which I found very
Mm.
useful in thinking about screenwriting. Specifically, I was reading a manga called 20th Century Boys by Naoki Urasawa, who's kind of like one of the masters of modern manga. His series Monster was really influential to me when I read that.
Mm.
And I guess for no reason other than that, it's just an incredible storytelling that's often happening in a combination of visual cues and through dialogue. And there's but it has different conventions and different constraints than a film. And so it can kind of make you see screenwriting from a bit of an angle, or from a slanted perspective. So I found that really useful, and I ended up in the script for Challengers when they would hit the ball, I ended up writing like whack, like it was a comic book,
No, that's really interesting.
which I
Yeah.
just found really useful rhythmically. So that, and then I mean in film, I think I saw Furiosa 3 times in theaters, and I kept feeling like I don't know how you even begin to show up to set or to your desk to write that every day. I'm like completely in awe of George Miller and Nico Lutharis, I think is how you pronounce the name of his co-writer.
Mm.
And writing can be so difficult. From just the creative process can be challenging from time to time. Do you ever feel creatively blocked? And if so, how do you kind of break break out of that, Jocelyn?
Well, I mean, it's definitely a discipline, that's for sure. I find that staying inside when writing something, staying inside it is really important. If I get interrupted a lot and I'm just pulled out of it all the time, that becomes a real problem. And that can sometimes amount to a block. But so far it's been more about just, the multitude of things that we all contend with day to day. That's really the issue more than an actual block. I do find that like going to see things that are not necessarily related to the project helps me think about it. I'll go look at art or I'll go to a concert or something like that. And that I find really helpful. So, thinking about one thing actually helps me think about the other thing. So it's a funny process.
Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's tough about writing in any medium is that it never gets easier. Or at least for me, you keep kind of thinking like, I've done this a couple times, maybe this time it'll go smooth. And it never does, but what does get easier is that you have the knowledge that you felt this same way before many times, and you somehow got through it and ended up with something maybe that you really liked, or maybe even just something that exists, right? And I think so that can give you courage, that sort of proof. But I think it's useful for me to remember that at some point I hadn't written anything and I made it to the end of a script. So you didn't even need that proof to have the courage. That was always available, you know. But yeah, that's how I get through the inevitable tough times on any script. Is I just remember it felt exactly this way last time, and now I don't feel the pain of that anymore. So this pain too will go away at some point.
Yeah, that's
Azazel?
true. Yeah, I connect with that for sure. I think every time I've gotten stuck, I generally feel like it's because I'm trying to be clever and I'm trying to write better. Like I try to write badly then just to keep writing. Um, I think that it's like I'm trying to write something as if it's a final draft. And if I can just take a bunch of steps back and just go like, no one's gonna read this, and just as long as I'm writing, and it could be as dumb as even if it's stupid as ever, but like I'm writing, that's worth it. And it's just I guess, getting rid of that ego of thinking like, oh, someone's gonna read this, and just yeah, I'm kind of being a bit more humble about what I'm up to at that point. And then the other thing is like I'm a pacer, so if I can go to a coffee shop, and it's just too weird to get up out of your chair and pace in the coffee shop, that always helps me. It just forces me to stay in my chair and keep writing.
Well, I want to congratulate you all again on the work you've done, and thank you so much for talking to me and sharing your insights about your craft and your profession. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Thanks
lot.
to everybody. Yeah, it's a
Thank you.
Thanks,
pleasure.
guys. Great to meet
Yeah.
you guys.